everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host Kushalmehra. All right, so today's podcast is about Abhijit Iyer-Mitra versus Twitter, and I'll explain why we are talking about this. So I am in North America. I am so used to the idea of insulting Abhijit on Twitter and Abhijit insulting me back, and then suddenly I realize, why is Abhijit not insulting me back? And then I message him कि तू मुझे गाली क्यों नहीं दे रहा? And he's like, कुत्ते मैं suspended हूँ. So, Abhijit, welcome. And why are you suspended?
So, I put up the proof that Srinivasan Jain of NDTV had footed the bail of Mohammad Zubair. Right. Now, what happened was, initially they said, you've shared private information, delete the tweet. Okay. So I checked, and sure enough, there was some, I blacked out most of it, but anyway, there was two phone numbers visible. So I deleted, so I scrubbed those numbers and uploaded it again, and it forced a 12-hour lockout on me.
Okay.
Right. Then I posted an appeal saying I've redacted the private information. So yesterday I get a mail saying, no, we've checked after like what, 72, more than 72 hours, saying, no, we've checked and you have in fact tweeted private information. You can't tweet unless you delete the tweet. So right now I'm refusing to delete that tweet, and we were waiting for the appeal to come from Twitter because now we're going to the High Court.
Okay, I need to understand this. When they say private information, Abhijit, can you explain what they mean by private information?
So addresses, phone numbers, etc.
But you just said you removed all of that. Then how can they use the same yardstick again then?
So herein lies the problem. Clearly, their appeal team doesn't function, is either untrained or it functions to differential standards. Do you remember when Nidhi tweeted out Nupur Sharma's phone number and address?
You're talking about that letter. So technically what Twitter would call your account is suspended or locked out, something of that sort, no?
It's locked out. I can get it back anytime if I agree to delete that tweet.
Okay.
But I am refusing to delete that tweet. Okay. Because my thing is, if I've removed the information, it is no longer a violation. A court document is a matter of public record. It is a public document. Right? As a matter of courtesy, of course, you do remove private details, but it is a public document. If you're happy to have that document in court, then it is a public document. It's as simple as that. Anybody can get their hands on it.
Okay, so now explain this inconsistency by using the example in the Nupur case. So what had exactly been done by Nidhi in the Nupur case and many other people who had done it inadvertently? Well,
Nidhi started it, but she tweeted out what the address and phone number of Nupur, and there were no consequences for it. Right. But this isn't the first time they apply these double standards for their friends and a different standard for people who are not their ideological compatriots. Do you remember Taylor Lawrence, the piece of trash at the Washington Post?
Yes.
Who was crying about being doxxed on Twitter and whatnot. She then went and doxxed this handle called the Libs of TikTok. Do you remember?
Yes.
Exposed her identity. Exposed her identity. Published her piece in the Washington Post, and despite Twitter's rules of not publishing private information, they allowed the link to stay. They did not lock her out. Right. So there have been repeated instances like this where people post private information, and if you're on the right side of the ideological segment, it's public interest. If you're on the wrong side of the ideological spectrum, it becomes violation of privacy. Right. There are lots of things like this. So you look at that trashy Team Saath, whatever. Obviously, when your entire handle is set up for mass reporting, you are engaging in targeted harassment. Right. Which is against Twitter policy. But they keep suspending and bringing back that same handle. Do you remember Shaila Rashid? Shaila Rashid is technically in violation of the Twitter evasion ban.
Okay, how?
Okay. because her initial handle, which he then, just before he became Twitter head, Rahil Khurshid had interacted with,
Mm-hmm.
that account got suspended. She then got a new account,
Mm-hmm.
which Rahil Khurshid proceeded to blue tick.
Okay.
So she also violated the ban evasion rule. So this is what keeps happening with these people, right? If you know people in Twitter, etc., 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 you get away with a completely different set of rules. And the point here is we are not ending with civil charges. We're also filing criminal charges against Twitter for abuse of their position in India, which should technically see a jail term. We are also suing the government, asking them why they're allowing an intermediary that is violating the rules for playing intermediary here.
So you're talking about the intermediary rules that were recently amendment, I think, in the last 3 years by the government of India through the new
Correct.
amendment.
Correct. Because the fundamental definition bias erodes the marketplace. At that point, you are no longer an intermediary. Correct. So therein lies the problem. When you show that there is a bias in this thing. So we are demanding three things. One is algorithm transparency, so that they can't hide behind this thing. Though we know it is not an algorithm transparency situation. We know it is a man in the loop situation where personal biases are being implemented. So we are asking the government to ensure first that they check the algorithms that apply in India. B, to ensure that there is no bias amongst the political bias amongst the man in the loop or woman in the loop or gender fluid in the loop, whatever it is. And third, if bias is found, they have to take action against them for market manipulation.
Okay. Can you explain what market manipulation is over here?
So market manipulation is very simple. Assume you own a market.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what you end up doing is that in all the entrance stores, you only put your goods. You don't let anybody else come. Second, you also end up underpricing everybody else. You tell them that you have to pay me this much rent, and because they have to pay you that much rent, they can never price it at the same level as you. Okay, so that becomes market manipulation. It's a deliberate distortion of the natural flow of the market. So this is the kind of market manipulation that Twitter and its staff in India does. Not staff in India alone, it's staff abroad as well. Because remember, the Indian staff are basically chaprasis and coolies. They have no say in anything. All the decisions get taken in Palo Alto.
Okay, but then just thinking out loud, what if somebody comes back and tells you, but Twitter is a private company and a private company can decide what thoughts it wants to promote on their platform? Why do they have to promote all
But
thoughts?
they are not here as a private company. They're here as an intermediary. An intermediary doesn't get to play favorites. That is the essence of, that is why it is called Intermediary Act. You act as an intermediary, right? Amazon can't manipulate things for Amazon Solimo products, which is why they got fined. Remember, Twitter can't promote a certain ideology. Now, if you come under the Print Act, so for example, the Hindu or the Wire, or I don't think the Wire comes under that. It comes under a different act. But the Hindu or the Hindustan Times or the Times of India, they can promote whatever they want because they don't come under the Intermediary Act. The Intermediary Act is very clear here.
Okay, so what essentially you're saying is that the Intermediary Act does not give you the right to play editor, and the moment you
Correct.
start playing editor, that is take editing decisions or editorial decisions where you decide what content is fine, what is not fine, then you lose your intermediary status. But that is a very slippery slope, right, Abhijit? Because every platform beyond a point will take the editorial stand, let's say, of not allowing rape threats, not allowing violence, etc., etc. Don't you think then this whole intermediary business itself is a bit of a gray zone?
It is a bit of a gray zone, which is why we want to bring clarity to it. In this particular case, though, it is no a gray zone because we have very clear examples of bias in how they implement laws. So, for example, Shaila Rashid with ban evasion, Team Saath with targeted harassment, Nidhi Razdan and Taylor Lawrence with leaking private information.
Okay, so what I guess I'm trying to understand this better as you explain is that even if Twitter plays by certain rules, the problem is that even within those rule sets, there is an uneven application of the same rule, and that makes them lose the intermediary status. Is that the argument?
That is correct.
Okay, so I guess it's that is a problem. But then how how does one go about it explaining to people? Like I have always had this. So there are two arguments given over here, and this is a debate that's happening in the American sphere also. Like there are folks like I'm sure Brad Palumbo. He's a very smart young man, and Brad's come on the podcast, and Brad always says that I don't like this tendency of looking at social media platforms as public squares because they're private companies. And I guess Brad comes from a libertarian perspective and from an American perspective. But can India, we are a different country. America is a different country. Now I'll give you a very simple example today. I don't know if you've heard this. Wikipedia has changed the definition of the recession, and it has stopped allowing editing on Wikipedia itself. Why? It's obvious, because America is going in recession. They don't want recession to be defined as how it used to be on Wikipedia. Wikipedia immediately changes the definition of what a recession is. And then this is this is now as good as saying that Wikipedia is a Democratic Party front. It is not even an American Republican Democrat front. It is a Democratic Party front. The Democrats happen to be in power, so it becomes the American government front. So in that case, is Twitter also now kind of an American intervention into person?
I don't think it's an American intervention. First, remember, the thing about the left and the right, the greatest difference is why do you have international leftism? Is because left wing principles are applied uniformly, evenly across the board, across the globe. Okay, you can find the first principles to apply. The right, by its very nature, is regional, it is parochial, and it is contextual. Okay, so what works for America does not necessarily work for India. In the Indian context, all right, the problem here is, first of all, having a foreign company define biases and slants for an Indian public sphere. Second, I know Brad Palumbo's argument with it is not a public sphere. Well, if it is not a public sphere, then it needs to be a profit-making company. The problem with places like Twitter and things is they are too ideologous. You saw what happened to their public issue. So clearly, they're not even very responsive as a public company. Right? They've constantly prioritized ideology. Now, when you decide to go into ideology, I will always reject this opinion. And I think the classic example of this is the East India Company, the British East India Company, which grew so powerful that it was able to manipulate and change electoral results. Now, a company gets the freedom to do what it wants till it starts determining election results or manipulating election results. That is the point where a company is right, or starts manipulating the law through certain points of view that could be that are essentially lobbying. So there is a thing that government should stay out of business, but there is also a thing that business should stay out of government. Okay, you can't have a one-way separation of power. Separation of power means a two-way separation of power. Clearly, Twitter isn't doing that. And what Brad Palumbo says is American law, that Section 206 or whatever that Trump signed was essentially his own death warrant, because they used that to ban him from Twitter. In India, there is no such law. Here, the government does interfere whenever it feels that there is a regulatory need to interfere. And in this case, normally I oppose it. In this particular case, especially being a foreign company, operating under something called an intermediary law, blatantly violating the tenets of that intermediary law, we need to take action against them. So we will be seeking arrests as well of Twitter officials.
Yeah, but then, I mean, you just said that the Twitter officials in India really have no power in their hands. So उन बेचारों
That
को क्यों
doesn't
झेलना?
matter. They're getting a check. Therefore, you are the fiduciary representative. And therefore, whether you like it or not, the criminal charges will be against you.
But can you explain how are the criminal charges being played up, like in your
Not
argument?
right now. I'm not going to play out the criminal charges because that the lawyers want it kept under wraps till it's filed.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. Now let's talk about this larger issue of bias itself. Is there any way possible for a platform, and this I'm talking from a tech perspective because I've spoken to a few techies. They're like, sometimes it's just algorithmic mistakes that that happen. So I'll give you an example. I have noticed this trend that you can muster up enough accounts to report a tweet or report a handle. A classic example of that I'll give you is Puneet Sani and his other handle, which is Seva, seeks for enlightenment values or whatever they used to call it. In the case of Puneet and Seva, basically the Khalistanis mass reported him and he's gone out of Twitter and now he's never coming back for life. He's lost his handle for good. He has no say in India because he's in another country and he never gets to say this or have a say. So what we see in these companies and these platforms is there is this tendency that you can weaponize it. And now I want to connect it to what you use, this example of Team Saath. So so how does one solve this problem? Can there be an intervention in your view where this kind of, and nobody should be allowed to weaponize it, whether the left or the right, nobody should be allowed to weaponize this कि आपने जी 1000 लोगों को 5000 लोगों को कन्विंस कर दिया इसको मास रिपोर्ट कर दो और वो बंद हो गया हैंडल.
Well, remember that's what happened with Armin Nawabi as well. They decided to mass report him, and that was the end of his handle as well. Right? So that was the right doing the mass reporting at that point of time. The point here is very simple. Your algorithms shouldn't be based on outreach. If you have rules, go by the rules. Just because 10,000 people take offense doesn't mean a person is guilty. Okay, that is the very definition of platform manipulation. Okay, assume one trader in your, to go back to the market that you run, Kushal, assume one guy manages to equal or even better your prices. Everybody else decides to complain about him. You can't throw him away because he's paying his rent. There was nothing in the clause that said that, so tell me, where in Twitter rules does it say outrage is a cause for permanent banning?
I have not studied the rules, to be very honest.
Well, I have. But here's the issue. It refuses to define hate speech, etc., etc. It just bans based on how much the outrage is. So one of the cases we will be making is that Twitter effectively acts as the second arm of terrorist movements aimed at India.
So do they define hate speech on Twitter like in the rules?
No, they don't. So they want to retain the freedom. Now you tell me something. If you use things like chakka, tranny, faggot for gay trans people, you will automatically get banned for hate speech. Okay. But you use Gaumutra drinker or bhakt for a Hindu right-winger, you will not get banned. So what is this thing of hate speech?
It is what the left decides what is hateful.
Exactly. So the language itself is determined by ideology. Right. So therein lies the problem. So what we are saying is that there has to be algorithmic clarity. The rules have to be followed. And if the person in the loop is making the mistake, then you have to show that the algorithm has been modified suitably for that. We will be seeking clarity on why is it that tranny, hijra, chakka are banned, faggot are banned terms, but why are bhakt, gaumutra drinker, cowpiss drinker not?
Yeah, ironically, that Iona Italia, she has deleted those tweets now smartly, but she has also used the Gaumutra slur, and she's the editor of
She
Aereo
used it
magazine.
against the two of us. She
Yeah.
used it on the two of us. And now she's masquerading as a great libertarian in America and conning even our friend Razib Khan into believing that she's a libertarian.
Well,
When
whatever.
she
I
was
mean,
here, imagine the caliber of Aryo. When she was here, her idea of libertarian right was Ramchandra Guha and Prakash Karat and Sitaram Yechuri and
how,
Karuna Nandi.
how nice, how nice, libertarian. But this is a serious issue then. So what has happened is that these social media companies now, and Project Veritas has done enough sting operations on Twitter. People can go and watch those videos. It's very interesting. Now, not that I'm a huge fan of Project Veritas or anything. I don't know anything about them. I just see their videos. And you recently saw a video of how, when you have ideology, why I'm using this as an example is you use the words ideology. So you have Twitter execs saying that हमारे top लोग हमको बोलते हैं पहले हमारा enemy Trump था. They literally are saying this on video. पहले हमारा enemy Trump था. अब हमारे को नया इशू चाहिए तो अभी हम क्लाइमेट चेंज को प्रॉप अप करेंगे. Now this is ideology. You are peddling ideology under the garb of, if you are a technology platform, you should be ideology neutral ideally. Yes, there are some lines that you'll have to toe कि ऐसे नहीं कर सकते कि बच्चों को harm करने वाली चीजें हों जैसे child pornography and stuff like that. That we are very clear on those lines. But the point is beyond that, especially in the realm of politics, you should be ideology neutral. But where do you see this? And if the evidence is there all over, can we use? So my next question is, let's say Project Veritas shows all these things of Twitter execs in America. Can that be shown as a case builder in India, that this is how a company works? On one hand, Twitter India says that we have no power, and if you have no power, then these people are the ones in power, and these people are the ones in power, and they are ideologues.
But look, the thing is, they have to come out and say that in court. Remember, the last time the government went after the Twitter head in India, he just said so in an affidavit that I don't have any decision-making thing. This needs to be stated in court because that means decision-making is being taken abroad. Of course, the government is now introducing the data localization bill and things like that, where it's going to screw all these people over. But that's a different matter. Till then, what do you do? Till then, there have to be criminal consequences for Twitter and other market manipulators like that. Or go in for the coup model, which is, or even the TikTok model. I don't know why, TikTok was the one company that complied unquestioningly with the Indian government's demands. The government used to say, take this down, take that down, take that down. TikTok used to say, okay, because they're Chinese. A Chinese company believes you follow the local laws. When the local law tells you something, you do it. Bas. This is between the citizens and their government. You want it restored, you go ask your government to lift the ban. Don't sue us. Mm-hmm. As opposed to Twitter, that considers itself some beacon of free speech. Its fundamental mission statement is ideological. Right. So I am not the one saying that they are a public sphere. They are the ones saying that they are a public sphere. Right. Therefore, Brad's thing doesn't really apply to these guys. Because by their own admission, they are a public sphere.
I mean, they are a public sphere when it in reality, but they pretend to be a private company for
So here's the thing: it's like goalpost shifting. When it suits them, they're a private company. When it doesn't, when it suits them, they are a public sphere. When it suits them, anonymity is important. When it suits them, anonymity isn't important. So, for example, did they ever launch an internal investigation into how this lady Taylor Lawrence actually found out who the libs of TikTok was? It couldn't have possibly been done without the collusion and collaboration of Twitter or sources within Twitter. And yet, they will come out publicly and say, oh, the anonymity of users in China and Iran and places like that is extremely important.
No, so for this is very scary, na, Abhijit. Let's say there is some anonymous handle on social media in India that is challenging, let me be very brutal, लेफ्ट विंग डॉगमा इन इंडिया. देखो, हम लोग तो चलो अपना शक्ल दिखा के काम करते हैं, भले तुम हो, मैं हूँ, शाम है, हम लोग अपनी शक्ल दिखा के काम करते हैं. देयर आर सम पीपल फॉर वट एवर रीजंस, दे आर एनोनिमस. तो यहाँ पे तो मतलब क्या ट्विटर इंडिया में भी ये काम होगा? दे विल स्टार्ट कोल्यूडिंग विथ, लेट्स से, I don't want to use the name, but I'll still use it. Let's say Alt News comes on board with them, and then Alt News starts targeted, attack, to use not literally but metaphorically, targeted campaigns about certain people. Can that happen then in India? That's what my worry is, because we don't want a slippery slope to come.
Repeat the question. I didn't get it.
So again, I'll explain it to you. So you just use this example of Taylor Lorenz could not be possibly not doing this without Twitter helping her. My worry is that now you have Alt News as an official, वो लड़ेगा fact checker, तो उसका official fact checker है ना ये Twitter का. So there are anonymous handles in India also that, for whatever reasons, job नहीं खोना चाहते या कुछ नहीं करना चाहते, they must be
right.
doing.
So here's the conflict of interest. They have commercial agreements with Alt News. Any new Alt News fact checker, they tend to blue tick them almost instantly, whereas everybody has to wait in a queue. So we want clarity on the blue ticking process as well, because that is basically the fundamental definition of bias. So we're demanding that all Twitter executives here and in Palo Alto have to disclose their personal relationship with the two persons named in that document, Srinivasan Jain and Zubair, and their two organizations, NDTV and Alt News.
Okay.
Because for them to be operating an account which directly runs, tomorrow if Twitter shuts down Alt News's business itself is finished. Na?
Mm-hmm.
Alt News is like Op India. Alt News is basically like the Op India of the left. If either of them get banned, their hits and shares stop immediately.
Okay.
Who's going to read them otherwise? Twitter is the megaphone that both of them use. Now, if people in Twitter have any kind of a personal friendship or personal relationship with members of Alt News or a contract with Alt News or NDTV for that matter, they need to be disclosing it, because they cannot be in any decision making that in any way involves NDTV or Alt News.
Or if they are, they should be very open and, honest about it, right?
Exactly. But just being open and honest isn't enough. By the Intermediary Act, fundamentally it's not fundamental. This is one of the things we want to clarify within the Intermediary Act, that when there is a conflict of interest, you can't say we're a private company and therefore conflict of interest is fine. Conflict of interest is never fine in any business setting, including in an intermediary business setting.
So यार फिर वही बात आती है जो मैं और तू इतने टाइम से कर रहे हैं. We've been talking about this for such a long time. This is an issue of deplatforming, and we just have to come up with some solution for deplatforming in India, where
it's much more than an issue of deplatforming. I'm just using the deplatforming as a segue. This is an issue first and fundamentally of sovereignty, that who gets a public sphere in India, who determines who gets the megaphone in India. You cannot be in India, you cannot be a foreign company in India and say you get a megaphone or not. Okay, who takes the decisions? Who determines the algorithms? Do the algorithms comply to Indian law? Because see, the protections you have under American law, you do not. No private company has those protections in Indian law. You can't claim American protections in India. So there's a question of sovereignty. Where is the data stored? How is the data used? Is the data used according to American law? Is it used according to Indian law? All right. So there are all these issues to be considered, and that is what we're opening up uh, 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 for the courts to decide.
Yeah, Magar, the first step has to be a deplatforming law, right? If you don't have a deplatforming law which basically de facto evens the playing field, how the hell does anything else? It all flows from basically stopping this bias, right? If the government comes up with a law, I don't know which country was that where we had discussed. In fact, you and I had both read that law. कौन सा था, कोई यूरोपियन नेशन था जिसने वो एक डीप्लेटफॉर्मिंग लॉ लाया था. उन्होंने बोला था कि Twitter and any social media platform literally cannot take a decision to deplatform someone, and if they do, those people can sue Twitter in their government, and Twitter will have to pay a fine if they find it legit.
Poland. Poland is the
Yes.
one that has that law where you have to pay 2 million euros per person for the entire period of the deplatforming. Right? Now, in India, the government has actually taken a very clear stand, which is very similar to the Polish government stand, that you cannot deplatform. If you deplatform, you have to give reasons for it. It has to be clear reasons. It can't just be some vague reason saying, oh, you are in violation. You have to say what the violation is and give the opportunity to fix it, etc., etc. And that the ultimate arbiter is the government and the courts of India, not some private company. Because the Indian government's definition of this, more than an intermediary, is that of a public sphere.
Okay. Now, here's the thing. What do you tell people? Because look, the first thing that, and this is going to be the left wing answer. The first thing the left wing will tell you is, you don't like the platform, leave the platform. What do you tell them?
If you don't like the platform, leave the platform. Sure. It's the same thing we tell them. If you don't like the government of the country, leave the country. Why contest elections? So you want to fight elections, but if we don't like the platform, we should just walk off. No, obviously we're going to fight.
And not only that, this argument is such a straw man. And just think about it. I mean, leave the platform. Yeah, we can leave the platform on our terms. When the terms are lopsided, and this is not just a question of my usage of Twitter, the question is a much larger issue of a foreign entity interfering in Indian day-to-day working. I mean, Twitter has no business doing that. And Twitter should realize that if the government of
So
India
that is why
wanted to,
it keeps coming back to a question of sovereignty. It keeps coming back to sovereignty. And this is what I keep telling the left. When they say, if you don't like it, leave Twitter. If you don't like India, if you don't like the government of India, get the fuck out.
yeah, and that should be the answer to Twitter, right? Twitter should leave India then.
Yeah, Twitter should leave India. If you don't
Yeah.
like the rules out here, get the hell out.
Yeah, and so now let's take this to the other side of the coin. Ek to tera case hai, where you are fighting it out now in the court. Now on the other side, there is a case of government of India consistently gives Twitter certain handles that clearly propagate violence against India. I'm not even like, there is no nuance there. They literally celebrate violence against India.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
support terrorists. And I say this word with full responsibility. These are terrorists by any sane definition. Whether
Yes.
it's the Khalistani movement, whether it's the Islamist movement, whether it's any other movement. And the government of India tells Twitter to ban. And to be fair, Twitter has banned many handles in India. Like, I know handles that I can see, funnily enough, in Canada. But if I go to India, I cannot see those handles at all. They are not visible. And let me tell you, those handles have suffered huge losses because उनके लिए India एक बहुत बड़ा market था. अब उनकी इंफॉर्मेशन इंडिया में जाना बहुत जरूरी था, जो अभी जा नहीं रही है. एंड ये बोलने की बात होती है कि I'll take screenshots and go on sharing it. It doesn't work so easily because people lose that kind of clout beyond a point. But even in that scenario, Twitter does not listen to every request of government of India.
Correct.
That is very scary.
Correct. And herein lies the point. If you want to function in India, you bloody well obey. They want unrestricted obedience to their rules as they interpret it, but they are not willing to give unrestricted obedience to the laws of the country as the government interprets it. So there's a lot of issues with the way they're interpreting things. The sad thing is their fingers are very deep. It goes right into the PMO. I know for a fact somebody in the PMO was celebrating my suspension, sending screenshots to everybody saying, yay. Imagine somebody in the PMO sitting and supporting Zubair.
Yeah, I don't know if they support Zubair or they dislike you more.
Yeah, pretty much. But that tells you what kind of people we have at the PMO.
Well, it is what it is. I don't know about that, so I'll leave out of that bit. But it again, this is a serious issue where there is a foreign company coming in, and I'll use now the other example. Now, let's be very clear. Twitter is a useful platform. So,
Hmm.
India, India has to be very sensible and sensitive when it comes to dealing with these issues. And I know this discussion is on Twitter, but I'll bring in YouTube now because we are having this discussion on YouTube.
Yeah.
So, something very interesting is happening, Abhijit, and I have been quietly. So, in YouTube ना तेरे को हर कंटेंट क्रिएटर को ना एक टैब मिलता है जिसको बोलते हैं रिसर्च. ठीक है, वो रिसर्च में क्या होता है, क्या आपके यूजर्स क्या देख रहे हैं वो बताता है यूट्यूब, और इन जनरल यूट्यूब में क्या हो रहा है वो बताता है, जस्ट टू एनकरेज यू कि आपको क्या कंटेंट बनाना है, आप वो कंटेंट बनाओ, आपको ज्यादा लोग, मतलब ये कोई पाप नहीं कर रहे, वो तो आपको फैसिलिटेट कर रहे हैं, वो एक आपको सेवा दे रहे हैं. मगर एक बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग चीज चालू है. अब एक तू ग्लोबल पर्सपेक्टिव से देख, लुक एट द लास्ट 3 year numbers of YouTube. YouTube has reached saturation in most countries, which is in Western countries. YouTube has reached saturation. It is being now taken over by TikTok. Ironically, TikTok is taking over the short video space till the extent I don't know if people realize YouTube is now promoting those 50-second videos, shorts. YouTube bhayankar promote kar raha hai shorts ko because it's trying to compete with TikTok, magar ho nahi raha hai. TikTok is just a better product than them when it comes to the short video space. Now, China में YouTube है नहीं, allowed ही नहीं है. YouTube के पास एक ही मार्केट है वर्थ एक्सप्लोरेशन एंड वर्थ ग्रोथ दुनिया में, पूरी दुनिया में, वो है इंडिया. दे हैव नोवेयर एल्स टू गो, दे ओनली हैव इंडिया. बट दिस इज व्हाट हैपेंस इन द सोशियो पॉलिटिकल स्पेस इन इंडिया. And I am telling you, I could be wrong, but if people think I'm wrong, please correct me. I'm open to being corrected. I see what YouTube pushes in 2 language mediums. One is English, one is Hindi. In English, if you look at content pushing in the news and politics space, it is all anti-Hindu, it is all woke, and it is all anti-India. YouTube is like Jekyll and Hyde in India. Then you switch over to Hindi. It is nationalism, it is anti-Muslim. I use these words with full responsibility. It is anti-Muslim, and it is all dusre kind ka craziness. YouTube is running this Jekyll and Hyde in India. It is literally running this in India.
But that is very natural because it shows you what people, so an English speaking audience is more likely, look at the number of subscribers that Republic has, and look at the number of subscribers that NDTV has on YouTube. That itself should tell you the kind of predilection of an English audience. On the other hand, you look at Hindi, you will see a complete reversal. So it is in fact algorithm driven. That part is algorithm driven. I've checked this many times, but then I go to the accounts being recommended and look at the sheer number of views and subscribers. It is insane. I think the only person who comes up in Hindi recommendations for me is Dhruv Rathi. Other than that, it's all hard right folks.
Yeah. So what I'm trying
but then it's because Dhruv Rathi is highly subscribed.
Yeah.
So clearly people want to go there. So if you go look at the comments under Dhruv Rathi, you will see they're all abusing him. So clearly people actually want to go see what Dhruv Rathi is doing. It's like how, you've seen this sport called sitting on a cactus. You don't You realize it is a painful sport, but there's this sudden bee in the bonnet that you have to try cactus sitting at least once in your life. So you go to the Dhruvrati channel, get the cactus up your bum, leave a few abuses and come out.
Yeah, it's
It's the
recreational
same way it
outrage.
is. Remember, the biggest readers of the New York Times and Washington Post are the Indian right wing, because they immediately, they're the biggest sharers, the biggest make famouses and things like that. So those algorithms, I've been sitting and looking at a lot of that for this case. All of those you can kind of explain away, right? More or less, you can pretty much explain it away.
Yeah, but it's very interesting how the Jekyll and Hyde happens in the Hindi and the English
Yeah,
space in
yeah.
India. It is fascinating.
But
I
I used to be in Hindi WhatsApp groups and English WhatsApp groups. The conversation was completely different. The nuance was completely different. The emphasis was completely different. So, for example, if somebody got arrested in all the English journalist WhatsApp groups, it used to be, oh, can the law be applied? Is this a correct application of law? It immediately used to go into this arguments about legality or the lack of legality. In the Hindi WhatsApp groups, well, they've all now become Signal and Telegram groups. Nobody wants to talk on WhatsApp anymore. But in those, I just call them WhatsApp group for convenience. WhatsApp groups, it's पुलिस ने कितना डंडा मारा, ठीक से मारा कि नहीं, फूला कि नहीं, खून निकला कि नहीं, हड्डी टूटे कि नहीं. So they're not even getting into questions of illegality or legality, as the case may be.
So I guess it's a bit of both. YouTube finding out what they think is the market and pushing it, and the market lapping it up. Aha,
Yeah,
de
yeah,
de.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a bit of both, which is it is, I think, worrying. But I think why I use the YouTube as an example is YouTube is a platform where the government can actually extract its pound of flesh, because they need India more than India needs them. They
Yeah.
need India far more than India needs them, and I think government should extract their pound of flesh from YouTube. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's all my limited point is. But in the case of Twitter, I don't know what the Elon Musk deals is going to uh, be happening with. I mean, मेरे को नहीं मालूम Elon Musk का क्या हो रहा है. I think वो end में फिर से बनिया बन के खरीद लेगा सस्ते में. Do you think
That's what I suspect too. He's going to bring its stock and share price down massively, because this is a credibility issue of bots that they can't really. It's going to plague every single purchase from now on. It's going to plague their share prices from now on.
Yeah. And I think maybe, because my biggest worry is that, do you see Twitter interfering actively in Indian elections in 2024?
Very much so. Very, very much so. If you remember, I filed a case against them, against Facebook, for interfering in Indian elections in 2019. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
They removed our friend Vikas Pandey's page and things like that from Facebook. And there was a strict conflict of interest out there, because the fellow sitting out there who leaked all the things about that Ghosh lady was himself in a Congress research position, and he's the one who leaked all that crap. He still continues to work in Facebook irrespective, but they've become a lot more careful. But where is the doubt that Twitter is going to interfere in the elections? Trump gave them that section 206 or 260, I forget what the name is, protection, because he thought they would not. And look how they screwed him over. Boss, here's the point. When it comes to military preparedness, we always say prepare based on capacity, not based on intent. Because intent can change overnight. One day it was Hindi chidi bye bye. Next thing you know, they were invading us. Okay. So it's the same thing here. The principle is no foreign power should have the ability to hide their algorithms for Indian law, or in any way interfere with Indian elections, thought processes, public spheres, and conversations. Because if you let them do it, you don't know how it is going to creep in and how they will use it to screw you over.
Which is something that I am genuinely worried about. I think no social media platform, including social media platforms which are Indian, should be given so much power that they can interfere in Indian elections and Indian democratic functions. But let me tell you, it's going to happen. It's happening in America.
But
Big
it's
tech.
already happening.
Yeah, yeah.
It's already happening. You look at the way anybody anti-government is blue ticked instantly. Aisha Ghosh, the moment she became semi-famous, blue tick within like 12 hours. Sheila Rashid, blue tick within 12 hours. Umar Khalid, blue tick within 12 hours. Everybody who propagates an anti-India thing gets a blue tick within 12 hours.
Yeah. Which
So
is very
the thing
interesting.
is already happening. Therein lies the point.
Hmm. Yeah, it's actually worrying. And if anybody, who cares about Indian democracy should be worried about it, well, we started worrying about it the day all these platforms deplatformed a sitting president, albeit outgoing president. But they deplatformed Trump. But yeah, it's very scary that these things happen. Chalo, let's take a few questions, Abhijit. Kaha gaye question? Okay. Do you think we need an equivalent of GDPR in India? Will it stop arming these social media platforms against our national interests?
GDPR?
I don't know what GDPR means, honestly, because the
Me
person was
neither.
asked. Yeah, so uh,
Let me just Google it quickly. GDPR
I don't
full
know what
form.
GDPR means. मतलब लोग
General
angry.
Data Protection Regulation. That is exactly what the government is bringing in.
Hmm.
They see we already got a data protection regulation. The problem is there is no ability to enforce it. Why we got it was for the BPO industry to Europe. Was not allowed to outsource data to India unless we had a data protection regulation. Therefore, it was passed in law. There is no way of enforcing it because one of the first things that happened, Google this, you'll find that after that law was passed, what happened was there was the Delhi, there was a porn website that was showing videos of Delhi couples making out at metro stations.
My goodness.
Somebody had gone to metro stations, found where all couples are making out in which parts of the camera, and put it together and was supplying it to a porn site. To
My
date,
goodness.
nobody has been arrested in that case. This is in 2016, so 7-8 years
My
on,
goodness.
nobody's been arrested in the case. Nobody knows. There's been no investigation into the case. Nothing like that. Okay, so that is the sad state of your data protection. The thing was, it was just a tick mark that India had to do so that BPO can say, we operate in a country where there is data protection. The ability to analyze data theft loss is non-existent in India. So
Got it.
again, you bring about the data localization law and the localized decision-making laws. Again, how are you going to implement it? There is no state capacity. Does the state even have the capacity to read advanced algorithms? You look at the kind of linguistic research that Google does, which then filters down into Facebook and Twitter and all these people. It is of a level we can't even comprehend in India. We're not even close to that place. I mean, you read this guy who got sacked from Google for saying it had become sentient, or that Ethiopian or Eritrean lady who was saying that she raised certain questions and therefore she was sacked. You look at the depths to which they are psychosomatically going about and implanting this sort of left-wing, leftist knowledge and methods and into the algorithms. So when you look at the algorithm, you won't see what the problem is. For example, the word progressive. When I say progressive, what does it mean?
General progressive nature, where you want to make improve the standards from the previous set line, right? That's progression.
So how will you do it? Capitalism or socialism?
I would choose capitalism.
But here's the point. Today, when you say progressive, it means you are left-wing.
Yeah.
Because apparently allowing child molesters, mainstreaming pedophilia, having abortion parties and abortions at will, elective abortions which do not pose either social or life threats, purely for the sake of I feel like it interferes with my lifestyle. are progressive causes. You see it as, but a person who doesn't study sociological shifts like that, for them progressive will simply mean exactly the example you gave me. Tell me, how is normalizing pedophilia progressive? How is having children raped progressive? You remember they forced James Lindsay to delete his tweet, our friend James Lindsay. They forced him to delete his tweet because he said, he used the word groomer. Apparently, groomer is now hate speech.
Groomer भी hate
Persons who
speech
are
बोल रहे?
attracted to minors,
Yeah,
child
like birthing
rapist,
people.
kitty fiddler,
Yeah, yeah, like birthing
dirty
people.
fucking pedo.
Yeah.
But this is progressive values. Okay, taking away people's property is progressive values. To such an extent that the World Economic Forum, which is meant to, Klaus Schwab says you will own nothing but you will be happy. That is literally a line out of Big Brother in 1984.
I guess. Well, it is what it is. Okay, the next question is, if private media houses can have their biases, why can't private companies like media? Why can't we, the non left, boycott a Twitter and create something like Truth Social? How's Coup doing in India?
Repeat? You read it too quick.
Okay, if private media companies can exist, Abhijit, why can't private social media platforms with biases exist? You don't like Twitter? Go to Coup.
Sure. Uh, but here's the point: you operate under something called the intermediary status. Then change the law and bring them under the publisher's law, no? Where you're allowed to have a bias.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The
So,
problem with that is, under the publisher laws, you are not allowed to be a foreigner. A foreigner cannot be the editor. So even under those laws, what Twitter is doing is illegal. They have two options: one to go under the publisher law, one to be under the intermediary law. Under the intermediary law, bias is illegal. Under the publisher law, you cannot be a foreigner. They'll have to devolve all the power locally.
mhm. Another question again, this is about the same thing. Are you going to ask specifically for a deplatforming law as a part of your case?
No, because deplatforming law is problematic in my opinion. However, proving marketplace manipulation and conflict of interest is a much easier thing. So that is what we are proving.
Hmm. Okay, this question, I'm going to twist this question around, but the state of affairs of the Indian judiciary is really scary. In such a scenario, you going to the courts with complete lack of judicial reforms in this country, how much hope do you have? And let us keep this as our last question because I know you have to go in 5 minutes.
I generally have no faith in the courts or the law in this country. That said, we have to have faith in the country itself. When you lose faith in all the institutions, it leads to civil war. Okay, so I'm not going with any great hope, but the point is that Twitter has to understand that this is not going to be a cakewalk for them.
Yep, I agree. And you know what? I hope what you're saying is true, because my point is very simple. A private company of any sort, by the way, Indian or American, should not have that kind of a say and control in a democracy, because
Yeah.
and the problem is, look, we did not know what kind of a hydra monster San Francisco was creating in the 1990s. I'm not blaming San Francisco techies for that. They also did not know these things are going to take off and then they are going to become so huge that our entire lives will be based on that. Somebody, I don't know if you know Colin Wright. Like, look what deplatforming does. कॉलिन का पेपैल कैंसिल कर दिया, कॉलिन का एक और पैसा लेने का अकाउंट कैंसिल कर दिया. अभी पेपैल हर इंसान को डीप्लेटफॉर्म करी जा रहा है जो सेंट्रिस्ट है या सेंटर राइट है या फार राइट है. अगर आप ऐसे करते जाओगे तो लोग जिंदगी कैसे जिएंगे? That is what
Hmm.
scares me the most in this entire process.
And see, therein lies the problem. This is where the American system is so bad. This is why I tell people, do not be ideological, be commonsensical. The truth lies somewhere in between. You can't give companies so much freedom that they can screw up people's lives. At the same time, you can't have the state control everything. The balance is to find a common sense answer somewhere in between. Because remember, a lot of the left's positions have evolved purely not out of common sense, but out of opposition to the right. And a lot of the right's positions arise not out of common sense, but out of ideological opposition to the left.
Very important point.
Okay, this protection of private property comes about from the 16 and 1700s, where the nobles were doing a process called enclosure. So they were taking over what was the commons, where the villages the villages owned the land and the cows used to go graze out there. They would shut off the grazing, so there would be no grazing for the cows. The tenants in the village would then keep defaulting, and then it would come to private this thing. Now, private ownership then, the moment 1848 and the revolts of 1848 started off in Europe, the Brits got very scared and they enshrined this private property law, which has then become the be all and end all of all discussions on capitalism. And therefore, it's my company, I can do what I want. I'm sorry, you cannot. Because contrasted to that, you can do what you want in business. You cannot do it with other people's, like they say, your right to raise your hand ends where my nose begins. PayPal's ability ends where Colin Wright's financial well-being is concerned. Twitter's rights ends where my right to freedom of speech is concerned. Their ability to play politics ends where elections and democracy are concerned.
Fair enough. I think that's a perfect way to end this discussion. Original plan was Abhijit and I were going to talk about Bronze Age, but then suddenly this happened. So I told Abhijit, "Agle mahine Bronze Age discuss karenge." So we'll do it next month. But we had to talk about this Twitter thing, buddy. As always, pleasure talking to
But
you.
do join us for the Bronze Age thing, because we're discussing why and how India was so far ahead in the Bronze Age, and how we suddenly just lost it, where we're consistently behind everybody else after that.
Yep. So, guys, we'll end today's discussion. Abhijit has to leave now, so we'll end. Usually, I know we do an hour and a half, but we have to do an hour. So, follow. Abhijit is still on Twitter. He'll be back there. So, still go and follow him on Twitter. And as far as I'm concerned, you know the drill: YouTube, Patreon, merch, or UPI. I'll see you guys next time. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.